What's going on, guys? Forgot the hat. Got to put the hat on today because it is a good day to be a Buckeye and a Steelers fan. Had a good weekend for my co-host with the most, Adam Holz. It's not so much a good day to be a Cowboys fan, but we'll get into all that. Let's do the intro from last week. Ta-da! All right, so we are getting started. Nice and early for you this morning. Running a little bit behind because there was so much to do, so many things to try and compile for this thing for you guys. The first thing I want to do, I'm going to throw it up here in the comments. We want you guys to join us. So all you got to do, boom, is follow that link. Come on in and tell us about your fantasy weekend. I'm going to put it up here in a banner as Adam talks about his fantasy weekend. Adam, welcome to the show, of course, as always. Good morning.
I mean, for fantasy football, 3-3 week. So, I'll take that, not too bad. What was bad, though, was my Cowboys this weekend. Absolutely pitiful performance against probably the worst team in the NFL. They look like they just assumed that they were going to sleepwalk and win that game just by showing up. That's not what happens. The red zone disasters continue. But look, that obviously hurts me as a Cowboys fan. I'm a silver linings guy, right? Let's try to take something positive out of this. Two things. One, it can only go up from there. It's not going to get a worse loss than losing to the Cardinals. And for two, I'm a survivor knockout pool kind of guy. I'm in a bunch of those. And the Cowboys losing knocked a whole bunch of people out. So there you go. There's my silver lining as an angry Cowboy fan this morning.
Look, if you are in one of those survivor pools, you are like so many people. If you happen to get out of this,
I mean, Ravens, Jags, Cowboys.
It was horrible. I got knocked out in week 1.
Ravens, Jags, Cowboys all losing. That helps us in those knockout pools. I had Chiefs, so I'm safe.
Yeah, I went Chiefs in that first week, and so I got knocked out real quick. Let's see. Let's do the record watch. Let's do that real quick, the season record watch, and see how that's turning out. I can't say it's turning out bad. I don't want to say it's necessarily turned out good. I did the 8-8 this week. You went the 11-5. So it seems, so far it's one or the other. I had a good first week. You had a good this week. And it actually comes out that we're both tied right now at 28-20. 28-20. We're on the plus side of 500. I'll take it. We're only at week 3, so plenty of room to grow here. But some big surprises, obviously, other than the Dallas game, which was, I don't know, probably arguably the biggest surprise, I think, of the weekend. I know one big surprise for me is the Pittsburgh Steelers. I actually did not pick them to win. You are already, a little more realistic on them, but as many wins as I gave them, I did not pick them to win this one because it was in Las Vegas, and my Steelers pull it out. So it's nice to see them come around a little bit. What other surprises were you kind of, other than the Dallas game, obviously, were you a little bit surprised at?
Well, I mean, I guess it's kind of surprising that the Ravens lost to the Colts with the backup quarterback, but they lost to a guy that I talked a lot about in the offseason, who's probably the best backup quarterback in football, Gardner Minshew.
I mean, and it was overtime, and the Colts had to dig it out. And honestly, I'm not going to say that Baltimore gave that game away, but they definitely, did not play up to the level they were supposed to play in. And then Gus Edwards comes out of there with concussion on concussion protocol as well, which we will, of course, get into like we do every week. I think for me, the big surprise, and what I kind of found out during this week, is this isn't as big a surprise to everyone as it is to me and you, and that's that the Jags lost again. And they probably definitely shouldn't have lost that game. I know, obviously, you're big on Lawrence. We'll talk about where Lawrence finished. It was in the middle of the pack. And
well, it's interesting. Apparently, he can't beat the Texans. Yeah. Apparently, he can't beat the Texans. They have his number for whatever reason. The Texans like to beat Trevor Lawrence. And when we're also talking about Cowboys-Cardinals, the Cardinals have won something like 7 or 8 in a row now against the Cowboys. So sometimes there's just those weird matchups that for whatever reason just go one way, even though they probably shouldn't.
Well, even going back into the Peyton days, Houston seemed to always have Indianapolis's number, and that's a trend that's always kind of continued. So it's just something about that. No matter if the coaches change, I don't know what it is. It maybe there's too much pressure. I don't know, but that is one of those things. That's one of those anomalies. We will get into the Week 5 schedule, but before we get into that, let's get into where everybody finished on your fantasy rosters. How did you do overall fantasy-wise this week? I know we're in multiple leagues, and so and we're in a lot of specialty leagues as far as best balls and things like that. But on the redraft side, how did you do?
Yeah, I mean, I consider, like I'm in a lot of leagues, kind of like you're in a lot of leagues. There's 6 like that I'm truly caring about paying attention to. There's a lot of them that have just been kind of set it and forget it, whether they be best ball and things like that. For the 6 that kind of matter that I'm like really into and making moves every week, I went 3-3 this week. So all my teams, my worst record is 1-2 in one league. All the other ones are either 3-0 or 2-1. So I'll take it.
I'm getting this weird flip flop thing this season where the teams that won last week lose this week and vice versa. And it's like straight across the board. So I'm either 1-2 or 2-1, depending on where in the pattern those teams fall. But I've definitely got a pattern going across all my picks. So it just depends on which one I'm looking at. But
an observation that I have so far this early in the season, when I look at my teams and how they're doing, there's a lot of justification this year for why zero RB works. The teams that I skipped running backs early are my teams that are doing very well and scoring high points. And that seems to be the trend in a lot of these leagues. The teams that went wide receivers early are the ones who are putting up massive scores. And just look at what the wide receivers are doing. I mean, this past week is a perfect example of that, with how many receivers went off this week and how many running backs were like meh.
Yeah, but we've seen the opposite of that as well. So what I am gleaning right now from the fantasy season and NFL in general is the I don't know, the ineffectiveness of preseason on NFL starters. They don't play in the preseason, so they're still rusty. The preseason become the elimination season. Who's going to make the roster, who's not. The starters really don't play. And so the first couple of weeks is all your starters really warming up and starting to get in the flow and figuring things out. And that's what I have noticed is the inconsistency across the board, regardless of the position. 1 week it's the quarterbacks going off, 1 week it's the running backs going off. And like you said, this week it's the wide receivers going off. And I don't know what that really means overall, other than it's just really hard to predict your fantasy rosters in the first weeks.
No, yeah, I mean, you're 100% right. And that's kind of a trend that's been happening over the last few years with less and less starters, and in particular quarterbacks. A lot of them don't play at all during the preseason now because of these massive contracts that, teams are terrified that they'll get injured in preseason. And, the other thing that's rubbed off, especially from like a real NFL perspective, is the first few weeks of the season, defenses are a disaster, especially with tackling. They can't tackle anybody. There's missed tackles all over the place. There's blown coverages all over the place. And that's because they're really not doing it as a unit against a real offense. So it takes about a month of the regular season for everything to kind of start coming together.
Let's ask
when
Denver.
It used to be the month of preseason, but like you said, there is no really month of preseason anymore. So they got to use the first month of the regular season to do it.
Somebody give me a call into Denver to talk about inconsistent and ineffective defense, ineffective tackling, ineffective coverage. Miami, of course, having the near record day, 70, putting up 70 points. If you played Devon Achane, not a chain, as he has made it. Now, Schefter puts out the thing that Achane doesn't want to be a chain. People have been calling him a chain. He's been in the program as a chain. Now that he's had his big day, throw a little respect on his name and pronounce it right. But they didn't actually put in the pronunciation. So I don't know if it's a Chan or I'm not quite sure. I'm going with the Chan right now until I hear, or if you're still supposed to say a chain, I don't know. I think a chain is out, but I'm going to go with Chan right now until I'm corrected.
Look, after a day like that, he can be called whatever he wants to be called.
Whatever the hell. 203 yards on the ground. You know, if you've looked at fantasy rosters, over 50 points, and I know a lot of people, to include my wife, that left him on the bench. And she ended up losing by a point. So that was obviously frustrating.
Yeah, but you kind of had to leave him on the bench almost, right? Like it was really
like
hard to actually plug him in. Yeah.
It was the teams that lost Hunt already. Montgomery wasn't going to play. Eric Jones wasn't going to play, something like that. And so you were forced to play him. Maybe you put him on a DFS.
Yeah, but I mean, he had what, 2 touches the week before? You know, he didn't play week 1, and then he had, I think it was 2 or 3 touches in week 2. So, you know, that's a high risk play, but you know, a bench stash for sure. That a lot of bench stash people are now wishing they took that gamble and threw him in there, of course.
And it wasn't just a Chan either for Miami. I mean, everybody in Miami went off, of course. Tua over 300 yards. Tyreek goes for what I have, 157. You had Mostert well over 100 yards, almost 150. I mean, it was just ridiculous.
He had 4 touchdowns too. Both backs had 4 touchdowns each.
8 offensive, 8 defensive, 6 on the ground, 2 through the air. If you had a piece of Miami, you know, and likely you benefited from this if you had a piece of Miami. I mean, maybe not from a Chan, but if you had Tua, you played him. If you had Tyreek Hill, you played him, you know, especially with Waddle out. Like these are not, if you had Mostert, you played him. So you got some big points out of Miami this weekend.
Yeah, I mean, that's crazy too, because you just said it. And Waddle was out. They dropped 70 points, and they didn't even have their second best player on the field.
Insanity. I love it. I thought one of the cool things, they could have gone for the record. They could have tied the record. They were already up 70, coach electing not to. I think that's kind of a double-edged sword. People are really kind of playing this up that, oh, you know, what a nice gesture not to go for the record and just go ahead and let it go. But at the same time, like, he'd already run 70 points up. Like, he could have gone for the nice gesture back around 50.
He's kind of getting both. You're right. Like, he's getting credit for, like, quote unquote, not going for the record, but he's also getting blasted for scoring 70 points and leaving his starters out there for as long as he did, and, you know, going for it on 4th downs and stuff like that.
I haven't heard the starters complaining yet, so I'm not too mad at coach for doing it. Look,
I'm never mad at a coach for running up the score a little bit. I mean, it's the NFL. These guys are paid millions of dollars. If you don't want them to score more points on you, stop them. Don't let them score more points.
This will come up in college a lot as well, not to get too far off track, but
yeah, but college style points matter in college. You know what I mean? Absolutely. You kind of have to run the score up because only, you know, so few teams make it to the playoffs that you can't just win. You have to look good winning.
Well, I guess my thing is like, you know, if you don't want the score run up on you, don't step out on the field. That's my thing. You know, it happens. I understand. Maybe your talent level isn't the same. Maybe your school doesn't recruit the same. Maybe you're one of these lower end schools. You're not even a football school. You took the game. You took the money.
You took the game because you wanted the money, and now you don't want them to destroy you.
Now take your ass whooping. And
exactly.
Okay. That's what I tell you.
Take your ass whooping, get your paycheck, and do it again next year because you know you're gonna.
It's like when your kid gets in trouble. You know, if you're a person that spanks, if you're a person that doesn't ass whooping, the kid gets in trouble, take your ass whooping and don't do it again. You know, be on your way. That's it. That's the penalty for stepping on the field with the big dogs. It happens. Let's see. So fantasy watch, I guess we'll call it. Well, let's do the games first. Let's review the games because I like to put the fantasy stuff towards the end because it's all on our mind, and I want to give people a chance to get in, tell us about their fantasy week. I want to hear about your guys' fantasy week and how things went for you, to include you, Adam Holes. I love to hear about your fantasy week. But the games this weekend, we kind of talked about our predictions, how it came out. Let's talk about what happened in these games, what was surprising, what wasn't surprising, and just how things came out. We'll start on Thursday, New York at San Francisco. No real surprise here. We knew the Giants sucked. I guess maybe the surprise is just how bad the Giants sucked. I knew they sucked. We were up on Daniel Jones. I'm still, from a fantasy perspective, kind of up on him a little bit. But he goes from QB1 all the way to QB 31, drops 30 spots. He was going up against that San Francisco defense, so you knew he wasn't going to do well regardless, even if he was trying to play catch up without the pieces to play it. Brock Purdy gets one of his few over 300 games. It was just a huge tilt on this one. And one of those games, again, New York showed up, they took their ass whoop, and they go home.
Yeah, I mean, it was a disaster spot for the Giants all the way. A short week, having to go to San Francisco, no Saquon Barkley. I mean, there was a lot of reasons that pointed to them getting blown out, and that's exactly what they did.
Yeah, Tennessee and Cleveland, not really much worth watching here. I think maybe the biggest surprise is how many points Cleveland put up.
I think there was something worth watching here, and that's probably the best game Deshaun Watson has played as a Cleveland Brown. Maybe he's figuring it out. Maybe he's coming around. I know Tennessee's passing defense is awful, but Watson looked very good probably for the first time as a passer.
Well, that's my thing. That's what I don't like about this game is it did make Watson look good. And I don't think Watson is good. I still say stay away from Watson. But it did make Watson look good. You knew he was going to have to pass because Tennessee's rush defense is ridiculous. They're playing really well right now. And so you knew he was going to have to do that. You actually had picked Cleveland to win this game. So congratulations on that. I did not. And that lopsided, I did not see. And then again, I think the biggest thing I took away from this one was Cleveland's defense as well. We saw Cleveland's defense.
Awesome. That is a good defense, man. That's a great defense.
They played well against Pittsburgh. We saw they had a defense, but you had to go, but it's Pittsburgh. This one, you had Derrick Henry on the field in low double digits, not triple digits, double digits. And, they really made it so the offense could work. Cooper goes over 100. They did not rush well, and Watson gets almost 300 himself.
Yeah, and I mean, the other big question that, has to come out, and you just mentioned his name, is Derrick Henry done at this point? Like, he's obviously not completely washed up, but those days of him being that workhorse, give him 30 carries, he's going to run for 150 yards in his sleep, those days might be behind him at this point. And from a fantasy perspective, we're starting to see the Titans work in Spears more and more. He's getting on the field more often. They like him in passing situations. Remember, this is a contract year for Henry. He's a free agent after this season. So I think they will continue to bring Spears in more and more as the year goes on and kind of plan for him being the guy next year because Henry might not be back.
Yeah, I can see that because he's still going to want his money. Of course, running backs aren't getting the money anymore. I can see Henry not coming back. I can also see somebody snatching him up. But you're right. I mean,
I could see him moved at the trade deadline. If the Titans, continue to struggle, he's in a contract year, it's possible that they flip him at the deadline.
I could see, that is a great point and something that probably should be talked more about on shows that have more time to talk about it. But you're right. I mean, he finishes at RB, 58 down the 60s. He had 20 yards on 11 carries. He had under 2 yards per carry. Testament to Cleveland, but you're right. I mean, maybe an exposure for Henry as well. He hasn't gone over. He had 80 yards last week, 63 the week before. Has not crossed that 100 yet. He's only got one touchdown on the season. He hasn't played like the hardest teams, New Orleans, the Chargers, and then Cleveland. Cleveland, obviously the biggest challenge, and it doesn't get much better. He's got Cincinnati next week, so you're probably not going to see a lot from him next week. Indy and Baltimore crapshoots after that. So, it's going to be a slow start for Henry.
Yeah, I mean, he hasn't been bad. Okay, Henry hasn't been bad, but he hasn't been Derrick Henry. This does not look like the Derrick Henry we're used to over the last 4 or 5 years or whatever it's been. And I don't think that guy is coming back.
Yeah, I mean, Henry owners sell high. That's fair.
Yeah. I mean, I think now if you're going to move Henry, now is probably the time to do it. I don't see his value getting better as the year goes on. The only way it could get better is that situation, like I said, if they flip him at the deadline, depending what team he goes to, that could significantly increase his value or completely destroy his value, depending on what team that is.
That's true. But there are a lot of people that will think he's coming back, and I think that's
Yeah.
where you can get your value. There's a lot of people absolutely think that you're going to see the same Henry, and so and to be fair with the risk, you might, but you could probably get a really good value for him right now. Detroit and Atlanta. Detroit just annihilating Atlanta. Nobody in Atlanta really shows up. Bijan tried, but it didn't happen. Not that anybody from Detroit really went off either. Goff at 250. They only rushed for their leading rusher, Gibbs. You were hoping a big day out of Gibbs, only gives you 80. Amon gets just over 100. So I don't know if there's anything necessarily interesting about this game. If you're a fan, especially a Detroit fan, you probably enjoyed this game. I don't know if there's really much here. You'd like to see.
No, like there's really not. No, like there's not a whole lot there. I thought the game would be closer than it was. I thought the Falcons would, at least compete. But yeah, there's not much here. It's just those Gibbs owners, right? Gibbs owners are just waiting for that explosion, and he's showing signs of it. The workload has increased. Montgomery's out. He's had a couple really nice looking plays. His owners are just waiting for that day where he goes 120 and 2 touchdowns.
Yeah. I mean, really not. I guess we don't really need to say too much about this one. I'm kind of happy with that. I'm good if you're good. Let's see. We had New Orleans at Green Bay. New Orleans had this game in hand. Jordan Love was one of my do not plays of the week over on Wake and Rake at the Fantasy Sports Corporation. Catch them every Sunday morning on Wake and Rake. I have a little spot I do over there of guys not to play. Jordan Love was on there. He was not supposed to do well. New Orleans defense had only given up 1 passing touchdown to 3 interceptions going into the game. Jordan Love had only completed 29 passes. Of course, 6 of those were touchdowns. But this was supposed to be kind of a back-to-earth game, and it was until the last 2 drives. And the last 2 drives, Jordan Love more than doubles up his passing yards. He was just over 100 yards on the day until those last 2 drives. He rushes one, he throws one, and they end up winning the game. I think the big concern here for Green Bay, though, the big story on the Green Bay side is the fact that Jordan Love was their leading rusher with 39 when Aaron Jones isn't in there. But Olave goes over 100, and, of course, Derek Carr injures that shoulder. Green Bay and New Orleans.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's safe to say at this point that A.J. Dillon's a bum. He is not the guy. He has not made the most of his opportunities when they've come. He just doesn't look like he can handle that kind of load. He needs Aaron Jones there. And when he's an RB2, he's fine as an RB2. He cannot be the RB1, and he keeps showing that.
Yeah, no, they need Jones back. There's one, Green Bay.
Short week. Who knows if he's playing this week too, right? They play on Thursday. So with the short week, who knows if Jones is going to be able to make that one.
It'll be interesting to see how Love responds. Because, again, Love, not a great week. Honestly, Love, not great stats. We're going to get into all those in just a few minutes. But he doesn't have fantastic stats. He's got a fantastic completion to touchdown ratio. But, he goes 22 out of 44 for this one. 50%. That's going to drop him below 58% completion percentage on the season. He's not having 300-yard games. He's not having the numbers are not blowing anybody up. They're not doing a lot statistically on paper. They're winning you probably fantasy games because of the touchdown thing, but kind of Brock Purdy story here. He's in there and he's getting it done. He's doing what he's supposed to do, and it's helping him win games, I guess. I'm still not.
Yeah, I mean, it hasn't always looked pretty, but he's finding ways to grind it out. I haven't been a big Jordan Love supporter or Jordan Love fan going into this season, but if I was a Packers fan, I'd be feeling pretty encouraged with what Love has done through his first 3 games as a starter.
I mean, he is getting it done. He's protecting the ball. He did have an interception, but I mean, you saw at the end of the game, the last 2 drives, again, he doubles up his pass yards. He makes his fantasy day on those last 2 drives and wins them the game. He guts it out. The people, the players rallied around him. They played for him, and he led his team to a win when they were behind. That's what you need from your quarterback. That's exactly what he's there to do, and he did it.
And look, let's remember too, he's done all of this without his best receiver. Christian Watson has not
Oh yeah,
played yet this year either. So, like, that's another little check mark for him that when Watson comes back, their best playmaker is finally back on the field too. And like we said, he did this last one without Aaron Jones also. So, there's a lot to
absolutely.
like about where Jordan Love is at this point in his very
At
young
this
career.
point, at this point, 100%. How does your fantasy weekend go? Let us know in the comments below. You can join us and tell us. You can use your phone. You don't need video. Just hop in. Tell us how your weekend went. Let us know. The link is right there. But tell us how your fantasy weekend went. We want to know. We want to talk about your fantasy weekend and not just what we already know. We've talked about the Miami-Denver thing. We've talked about how awesome it was. It is really cool to see that regardless of what side you're on, unless you lose by like a point like my wife did because she left Devon on the bench. But I wanted to touch back on it real quick because my question is, are we super worried about Denver's defense, or was it just a point where they knew they were down, they were in Miami, they weren't going to win this game, so they kind of let it go, and they just let it get out of hand? Are they going to be able to bounce back? Because Denver's defense has been pretty good. Surtain, one of those guys, I thought he'd be able to lock Hill up a little bit. Clearly wasn't. I think it's safe to say there's nobody that can if Surtain couldn't do it. And are we worried about Denver's defense? We already are worried about Denver's offense. Do we have to worry about Denver's defense? Is this going to be the big stream next week? Everybody against Denver's defense?
Well, I mean, I think we do have to worry about Denver's defense. I mean, they were missing Justin Simmons and Frank Clark this week, which are kind of two important pieces, especially Simmons. I mean, that's not an excuse for giving up
Especially on that
70
run
points.
game. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's not, why they gave up 70. But I think for me, like, the big problem with Denver's defense is they are not generating a pass rush. And as we know in the NFL, if you can't get after the quarterback, your defense is screwed. It doesn't really matter how good your secondary is if you're getting no pressure on the quarterback. You give the quarterback and a receiver enough time, he's going to get open eventually. And
Look,
Tyreek Hill showed that.
The NFL set up for the passing game. It's set up for quarterbacks to win. You give a quarterback enough time to go through all his progressions, he's going to find somebody because DBs can't play receivers like they used to. All they can do is try and be there. Absolutely right. Minnesota, the Chargers go to Minnesota. We knew this was going to be a good game. It was a fantastic game. I know people that were there. It was a great game. Herbert throws for over 400 yards on your fantasy day. Woo! Madison, we said Madison was going to be grinding out. He knows his job is in trouble right now with Cam Akers coming in. He's definitely in a timeshare automatically next week. Keenan Allen. Oh my gosh, 215. Tell me you had Keenan Allen because I did. Woo! And the big hit, of course, to the fantasy rosters. You could be the beneficiary on the other end of this is that Mike Williams goes out for the season with the ACL tear. I hate to see that because I'd love to watch that offense cook, even if they don't win games from a fantasy perspective. I just love to have a piece of it. But for those that have the rookies sitting in the wings, like myself, now you'll finally get to play him. Chargers edge it out at the end against Minnesota. I really thought Minnesota was going to win this game at home, but you got a hell of a game and a good fantasy performance out of this one.
Great fantasy. The stars showed up definitely for this game. This is one of those games, right, that the Chargers and Vikings always play close games and usually find ways to lose in the end. So one of them had to win. So there you go, Chargers.
Big surprise out of this one, of course, Minnesota's record. We know how that looks at the end of the season, 0-3.
Something to keep an eye on with that 0-3 record. Something to keep an eye on if they keep losing. Remember, Kirk Cousins is in a contract year too. Does he get flipped at the deadline? Are the Jets on the phone right now calling about Kirk Cousins? Keep an eye on that. Like, I mean it. If the Vikings lose another game or two, let's say they're 0-4, 0-5, the season's over. He's on a contract year. Do they plan on paying him big money again? I don't know if they do or not, but he's a good name to keep an eye on at the trade deadline.
Here's the deal with the 0-3. Six teams have made the playoffs since in the Super Bowl era, but that was during the 16-game season. All right, most of them came in as wild cards. We have an extra game now, so 0-3 is not the death sentence that it was. It's not good. It's a huge hill to climb back out of. I'm not saying Minnesota's making the playoffs. And I love what you bring up about trade deadline or the Jets talking to Cousins. I love Kirk Cousins. I'm a huge Kirk Cousins fan. And Minnesota, that's fantastic. I love it. We're all going to watch it. I love it. I love the insights. What you get from the Adam Holz, NFL writer at Sports Kita. That's Kita with a K. Go over there, put the /Adam Holz, read his stuff. He puts out a ton of NFL information, and it all will help you win. I promise you. Go take a look at it. New England at New York. Kind of a snooze fest. This was going to be a defensive challenge. I mean, there was moments, but I mean, not something. I don't think anybody gleaned anything big off this one. I don't think there are any big surprises off it. I guess if you bet early before the Aaron Jones early injury, the surprises that New England won. We thought the Jets were going to be able to win this game. Mac Jones goes over 200. That's kind of a surprise. Ezekiel Elliott getting the 80 yards. I think that's something that is maybe the biggest surprise, the biggest hope for Jets fans or from your fantasy roster. That is, hey, I picked up Elliott on a flyer, and it looks like they're going to use him.
Yeah, I mean, it's not even necessarily the yards. It was the touches, right? He had 16 touches in that game, which is very encouraging for, people who do have Zeke or picked him up. Makes him an interesting waiver wire type of ad this week in a lot of leagues where he's still available. Because, look, it's Bill Belichick. Bill Belichick likes using multiple running backs. Like, let's not forget last year when he had Damian Harris was averaging about 12 touches a game, even with Ramondre Stevenson. So Belichick does like using more than one back. He's always in that theory that if you use a back less, you'll get more out of him on the efficiency side. So Zeke's a good blocker. Zeke's a good between the tackles guy. Those are two things Belichick also likes. So I wouldn't be surprised if Zeke is more a part of their game plan moving forward.
Yeah, and we said that in the offseason. We said if you're going to bring him in, that's what you're bringing him in for. He is a grinder. He wants to do a good job. He doesn't always do as well as you wanted him to do, but when he does, and he's not going to quit on you. He is a good blocker. I think that is a big thing we talked about running backs not getting the respect and running backs really having to have real value. They need to be able to catch the ball, but I think that is an aspect of the game that gets overlooked as being a good blocker because a lot of them are not. Zeke is a good blocker, and you've always
Zeke's
said
arguably the best pass blocking running back in the entire NFL. I mean, I watched him obviously a lot as a Cowboys fan, and look, I mean, for the Patriots perspective, that could be. Yeah, right, exactly. And from a Patriots perspective, that could be a big reason why they chose Zeke to be the guy that they brought in over some of the other available running back options is his blocking for Mac Jones. Obviously, they still want Mac Jones to develop. If you can have Zeke back there with him picking up the blitzes and helping him with a little bit of extra protection, that could help his development as well.
Absolutely. How'd you guys do? We're just kind of walking through some of the fantasy pros and cons of week 3. Tell us how you did. There's comments you can put in there. Tell us how you did. You can even join the show. Follow the link. Come on. Tell us how you did. Pop in, pop out. No problem. You don't even need video for that. We want to hear about your fantasy weekend. We're just talking about some of the highlights of week 3 before we get into week 4 and just kind of get into the specifics of it. Real quickly, let's go through these other games. Buffalo dominating Washington. No real big fantasy beneficiaries in that one. Houston at Jacksonville. CJ Stroud does it again, almost 300. Looks like they may have got this right. Tank Dell, the waiver wire pickup of the week. He's going to be the guy everybody's hunting down from the wide receiver side. Indy and Baltimore, we already talked about. Zach Moss getting 122 on the ground. Watch that for if your team is going up.
30 carries for Zach Moss. 30 carries.
Let's go. Waiting to see what's going to happen when JT comes back in a couple weeks as well. Seattle, Carolina. Man, that was a game. Andy Dalton, 361 while he tried to play catch up. Nobody played that guy except maybe in DFS, and he was a popular DFS play other than Kirk Cousins. If you went outside the box, got away from Cousins and picked up Dalton, you probably had a good weekend. Adam Thielen again. We'll talk about Adam Thielen because Adam Thielen might be a guy worth picking up on the waiver as well. He's been consistent.
2 weeks in a row. 2 weeks in a row.
Kansas City, Chicago, we got exactly what we thought we were going to get there, except I think Fields vastly underperformed in that one. I thought a lot of people were saying, Fields is going to be good fantasy wise. and he was not.
Yeah, I used Fields in some DFS lineups because I figured they'd be playing from behind, and that would give him some opportunities, not necessarily in the passing game, but if he's going to drop back 40 times because he's trying to keep up with the Chiefs, I thought that would equate to a lot of rushing yards, him taking off, scrambling, and things like that. Man, oh man, Fields just looks like a disaster, though. Looks like an absolute disaster. We knew the passing was an issue last year. That was always going to be the question this year, but he's not running either now. And I mean, he's just been a complete bust, arguably the biggest bust of this fantasy season so far.
Yeah, definitely so far. Look, I'm not surprised. I told you, I got the Buckeye stuff on the wall. Ohio State quarterbacks. Name one successful one. Name the guy who got it done in the NFL. And, we'll run that question back next week because it's going to take you that long to find one. Dallas, Arizona. We already talked about that. Huge surprise. All Dallas can do is throw that one away and keep moving forward. Tony Pollard still got you 122 on the ground. So, Pollard doing what he was supposed to do. You got to see some highlights from the backup with Dowdle. So that was nice to see. Did you see the backup coming in so early already? A lot of people did, but I don't know.
What, with Rico Dowdle?
Yes, yeah.
I mean, I expect Rico Dowdle and even Deuce Vaughn to get, a few more touches as the year goes on. I think they're going to kind of want to try to conserve Pollard a little bit because we talked about this before the season started, that Pollard has RB1 upside for sure. The big question mark is he has never handled a starter's workload. He's never been a workhorse back. He's never gone a full season of that punishment and wear and tear. So I think if the Cowboys are going to look for little opportunities to get him a break here and there, maybe take, 2 or 3 touches away at times. And look, Dowdle was running good in that game. So while he's running good, use him while he's performing because that's not always going to be the case.
Pittsburgh back on track. Yes, Jimmy G from behind gets 324, also gets himself on concussion protocol. But my Steelers, they look great against a mediocre Las Vegas team, but I will take it because that's 2 wins in a row. Go Steelers. Last night you had Philadelphia take out Tampa Bay as expected. I didn't see any big surprises in that one. DeAndre Swift finally makes an appearance on your fantasy roster, a big one with 130. And in Los Angeles, all those waiver pickups that we all spent a bunch of fab on did not bother to show up, but it was Cincinnati's defense who has been showing up and just really picking it up. Stafford back being Stafford with 2 picks, and Burrow, no touchdowns, but played much better this week, and they avoid the 0-3.
Well, with that game, the Jamar Chase owners are saying, finally, because he has not been good through the first 2 games from a fantasy perspective. That was the game that Chase owners needed to justify him being a top 5 pick in every draft.
Well, it's what kept Chase on people's rosters, and he didn't, he still only gets 14 points because he doesn't get the touchdown. He gets over that if you're PPR, which I prefer to talk about. He got 26 with your PPR because he caught 12 balls, and that's why I play PPR. But one of the top reception leaders on the week, number 3, I think, in receptions on the week, behind Keenan Allen and Devontae Adams. Adam Thielen, like you said, we're going to talk about right behind him. But anyway, Jamar Chase, 26 points, back on your fantasy rosters. And like I kept saying, it's the Burrow injury. You need to get him back up as he is getting healed up and getting better. You will see their stats go up, and that's what you saw last night. So that's good, trending in the right direction as Burrow continues to heal. I think you'll keep seeing that, and your Bengals will become more relevant. Mixon also showing up on your fantasy rosters. Let's talk about the progress, how players are doing on your fantasy roster for the season. We'll start with the quarterback position. And here's the thing. We talked about this being the week of the wide receiver, and we will get into that and what that meant. But at quarterback position, your top 10, the switches, we like to talk about how people moved up and down. Justin Herbert goes up 10 spots to QB1 this week. He was, already at 11. He's always been hovering around the top 10 like he usually does. So no big deal there. Tua, monster comeback, up 24 spots after being QB 1 or 2 if fed on format 2 weeks ago, but he's back up to number 2. Lamar Jackson up 6 spots to 3. Kirk Cousins, he only drops 2 spots to 4. He's still playing at that high fantasy level. Patty Mahomes back inside the top 10 at number 5, plus 7 spots. We got Jordan Love moves up 10 spots to get into that 6th spot. Andy Dalton debuts with the Bryce Young injury at number 7. That tells you how bad the QB day was. Not that Dalton had a bad day. He did go for 361 yards and 2 touchdowns. Fantastic day for Andy Dalton. But it does tell you something to have him debut at 7. Josh Allen at 8 only drops a spot. Hurts drops a couple spots, but still inside the top 10 at number 9. And Watson up 17 spots. Again, this worries me from a fantasy perspective because people are going to think he's better than he is, in my opinion. And he cracks inside the top 10. Your bottom guys, White's down there at 28. Wilson's down there at 29. Ritter's down there at 30. Jones drops 30 spots to 31. Howell at 32. And Tannehill actually at 33. Tannehill somehow manages out of 32 teams to end up at QB 33. So, chalk that up to what that is. That's how bad Tennessee played this weekend. What are your surprises? You got I got to cover up the notables as well. You had Pickett at 15. He goes up. Dobbs is in there at 16. Geno, middle of the pack at 17. T-Law at 18. And your boy Dak sitting there at 19. So those kind of where the notable names finished up. You got your top 10. You got your bottom ones. To be honest, I don't know. I'm really surprised at much on this list for a week 3, if I'm being honest about it.
No, I mean, not super surprising. Obviously, Jordan Love is like higher than anybody would have thought he'd been. Andy Dalton, we know that's a fluky thing, like don't run to your waiver wire to go pick up Andy Dalton, you know what I mean?
Right.
For me, Trevor Lawrence has been disappointing, especially with how much I hyped him up entering this season. Let's not forget, though, he did start. Yeah, I know. But let's not forget, though, last year he started very slow also and got better as the year went on. We talked a lot about the preseason stuff, and, he's got a new receiver in Ridley. And, maybe Trevor Lawrence is just off to a slow start. And I thought he would light up Houston, but maybe I shouldn't have thought that because, again, Houston's had his numbers so far in his young career. He can't beat Houston, apparently. So maybe this was a letdown spot all along that we weren't talking about enough. Now, when it comes to Watson, we talked a lot about, Jerome Ford with Nick Chubb out and Kareem Hunt coming in, right?
Yeah.
Maybe it's Watson that's going to be the biggest beneficiary of Nick Chubb being out. Maybe they're going to dial up more passing, get Watson on the perimeter, get him scrambling, get him throwing. Again, you can't take too much from this game because Tennessee's pass defense is awful and their rush defense is one of the best in the NFL. Very polarizing defense in that way. So we have to see a couple more games from Watson, but after a performance like that, his best one as a Brown, maybe he can build on it.
So as we stay in the quarterback room right now, you brought up Tennessee's horrible pass defense. Guess who they play in week 4? Your Cincinnati Bengals. Joe Burrow on the mend. We saw Chase with the game. We saw Higgins with the game. This may be the week. This could be your week to really get your
even if Burrow has just one leg. Even a one-legged Burrow will be just fine in this one.
Sit Mixon, but play everybody else. Tennessee and Cincinnati in week 4. Jacksonville goes to London to face Atlanta in London.
Mm-hmm.
So we get our first European game, early start on Sunday with Atlanta versus Jacksonville in London. Kind of looking forward to
a little Disney Plus action with Toy Story joining the game. Everybody tune in.
Yeah. Absolutely. I like that as you bring that up. But yeah, so CJ Stroud, I want to bring him up real quick because CJ Stroud putting up nice fantasy numbers for you consistently week by week as they play from behind. Maybe he'll be the Ohio State quarterback to break the mold. I don't know. Honestly, it's just a big beneficiary. But we talked about this last week, and we do talk if you're gonna take the rookie quarterback or the low-end quarterback, you're doing it the quarterback on a bad team from a fantasy perspective, you're hoping that you're going to get all those points as they try to come from behind. Herbert going over 400 as they battle that out. CJ Stroud has been the one to do it, to actually be able to perform during these comebacks, whereas the other guys haven't, like Fields, Young, stuff like that. CJ Stroud, 242 in week 1, 384 last week, 280 in this week. He's putting up the numbers. He's got guys like Tank Dell and Nico Collins being relevant on fantasy rosters. Look, I'm not telling you to start the guy, but if you're in a super flex situation, man, he might be worth throwing in there.
Yeah, I mean, he looks good too, right? Like when you watch him play, like he looks confident playing the position. He's making big throws downfield. He seems to be reading defenses properly, which through 3 games as a rookie, that's pretty impressive. And look, coming into this season, we talked a lot about these rookie quarterbacks during our off-season episodes, and we both agreed that we thought Stroud was the best rookie quarterback in this class over Bryce Young. And so far, I mean, look, it's only 3 weeks, like you can't like call him better at this point, but through 3 games, Stroud looks legitimately competent playing the quarterback position, and that's encouraging for his future.
As long as they can give him time to throw, I still say he's slow on progressions. I've heard other people say it too. He's been that way since Ohio State, but if they can give him time to throw, like we alluded to earlier in the program, give a quarterback time, he's going to find the spot. They have Pittsburgh this week. In Houston. Pittsburgh will go to Houston. So look for the same type of numbers as, Stroud has to try and battle back.
Newsflash, he's not going to have a lot of time this week.
No, he's not. No, he's not. I would not play Stroud this week personally, despite the numbers against that Pittsburgh defense. But, hey, if you're going to take your shot again in a super flex or something like that, go ahead. Let's see. Running back room. We know what Miami had. They had the top 2 running backs in the NFL. If you played them both, you had almost 100 points. You were you were at 96 plus points in PPR. So, don't expect that to happen again, but it's nice to see if you own those players. Kenneth Walker.
That's what I want to see. I want to see a screenshot of somebody who played both Mostert and Aton this week. Send in your screenshot.
I know people that have.
I'm sure it's out there somewhere. It's out there somewhere. Some Dolphins fan or some deep league or some kind of situation where you started both of them. Somebody has to have it out there, and I want to see it.
Yeah, someone took that handcuff, and they had both at least on their roster, even if they didn't play them both. They had them both there. I don't know. Kenneth Walker finally showing up in week 3. Gets you 30 points, 97 on the ground. Still doesn't break that 100-yard mark with 97, but he did get you 2 touchdowns on the ground, and that is optimistic if you put him on your roster. Chris C-Mac finishing at RB4, Zach Moss RB5. I think maybe, you're concerned if you had Ford, who only had 18 yards. You're concerned still if you had ETN. Madison finally showing up a little bit. You'd like to see more out of Pollard, but he had 122 yards. You just want to see him in the end zone. That's really what you're looking for from Pollard, is get him in the end zone. I don't know. Jahmyr Gibbs didn't show up. Ramondre Stevenson did not show up. Rashad White did not show up, but you shouldn't have expected him to. You shouldn't have played him. He's had 1 run over 10 yards prior to this game last night. He had 14 attempts. They're playing from behind. They have a little more faith in Baker. Rashad's just not going to show up this season. As predicted, Robinson Jr. did not repeat. Najee Harris continues to struggle. I don't know. Running back room. This was not the week for the running backs. I don't know. What running backs, Adam?
There was nothing super surprising about anything that you just said right there. And you know what I mean? But it wasn't a great week for running backs. This was a week for wide receivers, obviously. And look, Zach Moss, that's the guy I have circled right now because he had 30 carries. And I think that what the Colts' philosophy is right now is that I think they are expecting to get Jonathan Taylor back at some point. So they don't need to conserve Moss for anything. You know what I mean? They can just kind of run him into the ground at this point and give him as many touches as he can handle. And if he's producing, just keep giving him the ball because they don't have to worry about any kind of workload management when it comes to Zach Moss. So for now, at least until Taylor's back, if he comes back, Moss is a must start, right?
Yeah, I mean, I guess you have to, right? You got the Rams next week, so another favorable matchup for Moss as DeAndre Swift took him for one. I'm sorry, Joe Mixon got 65, but he got the touchdown, and you're going to want to pass against the Rams more anyway. But in this situation, it could be a spot where Moss again surprises you from the Colts' perspective that their strongest suit is not passing. Moss is going to get work. He had 18 attempts in in week 2, 30, and he's over 4 yards per carry. Even with 30 attempts, he's still over 4 yards per carry. You just want to get him in the end zone more, and that'll really push him over the edge. But yeah, you definitely play Moss, I think, depending on who you have to play him over. Let's see. You said this was the week of the wide receiver, and this is how much quarterbacks. We had 5 quarterbacks that got over 300 yards. Not amazing numbers. In perspective there. Running backs, you only had 5 running backs get over 100 yards this week. Only 5, and 2 were on the same team. So that'll tell you about the run game this week. Wide receivers, I don't even know how many you had over 100 yards. It was a lot. It was a lot. Just at a glance here, it's looking like you had around 15 wide receivers over 100 yards this weekend. Of course, Keenan Allen goes over 2. Devontae Adams had 172. Adam Thielen, 145. Adam Thielen, the guy I kind of want to talk about right now. But let's run down the top couple. Keenan Allen, number 1 with your 215. Devontae Adams, 172. Adam Thielen, 145. Tyreek Hill at 157. 157 on only 9 receptions. Well, I shouldn't say only 9 receptions. That's still good enough for top 5 in receptions. But Justin Jefferson at 149. Jamar Chase, 141. Tank Dell, 145 on 5 receptions. There's your only receptions, 29 yards per reception. Whew, Tank Dell smoking them down there. Then you had Debo. Then you had Mike Williams, who's out for the season now, and Amari Cooper. A.J. Brown actually finished with 131 yards, but didn't crack the top 10 in fantasy points because he did not get into the end zone. Adam Thielen is the guy right now. You talk about the waiver wires. A lot of people went for Tank Dell. Everybody else is going for Tank Dell this week. Find Adam Thielen because he is getting it done regardless of who the quarterback is in there. He had 9. He went 7 of 9 in week 2, went 11 of 14 in week 3, especially if Andy Dalton comes back next week, pick you up some Adam Thielen. But he is here to play. He is a nice deep league 3 wide receiver flex start for anybody.
Oh, yeah. I mean, he's played his way into lineups, right? I mean, 2 weeks in a row now, he's been very impressive, and he's done it with 2 different quarterbacks. So that's encouraging also. Like, this wasn't like, some kind of anomaly, like Andy Dalton really likes Adam Thielen, like that kind of thing. He's done it with both of them now. So even, when Bryce Young does come back, you shouldn't have to be worried about that dropping too much because he already did it that way too.
Well, honestly, who else are you going to throw it to? I mean, you got Chark. Chark finishes at wide receiver 15. He had 4 for 86. He had over 20 yards of reception as well. But Chark just isn't consistent. Chark doesn't have the separation. Yeah. And Chark can still drop a ball. Like Chark was targeted 11 times. He went 4 for 11. 4 for 11. That's ridiculous. 7 drops. Mm-hmm. I'm sure they weren't all his fault, but out of 7 of them, I'm sure plenty of them were as well. And that's a consistent story with DJ Chark. So honestly, probably shouldn't be too surprised when you got a veteran like Thielen, who's clutch, has been clutch his entire career, being the guy in Carolina. He's someone to look at in your waiver watch this week. I don't know. Tank Dell is the other story. That's the only way around it. That's the name you're going to hear all week. That's the guy everyone, like I said, everyone else is going to go for that didn't last week.
Thankfully, I added him in a lot of leagues last week. I took that gamble on Tank Dell last week with kind of the slim pickings on the waiver wire last week. Tank Dell obviously paid off. I actually had him in one lineup this week, which was even better. But yeah, in any league that he's still available, he is an absolutely must-add on the waiver wire. And then the other place you have to look is the Chargers, right? With Mike Williams officially out for the season. Yep. The debate is, do you want Josh Palmer or do you want Quentin Johnston? So far to this point in the season, it's been Josh Palmer. He's been, more volume than Quentin Johnston. now that the roles are changing, it doesn't mean that that's going to continue. Quentin Johnston's going to be on the field now more. Him and Palmer were kind of splitting that wide receiver 3 for the Chargers. They'll both be on the field now, so it's tough to say which one of them is the better ad this week. It looks like it's Palmer for now based on what they've done to this point, but don't be surprised if that flips going forward.
Yeah, look, Quentin Johnston got 3 targets, okay, to Palmer's, come here, to Palmer 7 targets. So that tells you something right there. And to that point, dial back to Tank. Tank had 10 targets the week before, 7 this week. We'll switch that 7 and 10. So, it's the guys who are getting the targets. It's the volume plays. Like you said, right now, you're probably looking more at Palmer. And until Quentin, now that Quentin is most likely to be a regular part of the wide receiver setup, we'll see if Quentin gets more targets and maybe Quentin proves himself and can work his way up and work himself ahead of Palmer. But Palmer's been there longer. And Herbert's more comfortable with Palmer.
I'll say this. I'll say this about the waiver wire, though. Like, everyone's going to be targeting Palmer. He's going to be obviously the more popular waiver wire ad this week. But don't forget to put Quentin Johnston on your waiver list also. If you miss out on Palmer, when you set your waiver priorities this week, it's fine if you have Palmer above Quentin Johnston, but don't leave Quentin Johnston off. He makes for a great bench stash right now as a speculative ad because without Mike Williams, that's a lot of targets that open up there in one of the most high-powered passing offenses in the NFL. They're not all going to go to Keenan. Some are going to go to Palmer. Some are going to go to Johnston. Remember, they drafted Quentin Johnston in the first round. They drafted him in the first round, which means they plan on him being a big part of this offense at some point. Maybe it wasn't supposed to be yet, but circumstances have changed. As a first-round pick, they might say, all right, kid, it's your time to shine. Go show us what you got.
Palmer's the guy to grab if you need a receiver. Quentin's the guy to grab if you
stash.
Yeah, he's the stash guy because
if you got a bench spot that's open for a stash spot, Quentin Johnston is a great stash right now.
1,000%. He will get his playing time, especially with Mike Williams out. He will surpass Palmer at some point, but Palmer's the guy that Herbert knows right now. He knows what he's got. He knows where he's going to be, and it's just going to take a few games as the season goes on for him to figure that out with Quentin. But as he does, Quentin will, the cream will rise to the top, and that's not to put Palmer down. That's to say they drafted Quentin for a reason. Jerry Jeudy gets 7 targets, 81, just couldn't get in the end zone. That was, a lot of problems here. Puka was the guy that everybody grabbed. He got his 7 targets. He got his 5 receptions, although a couple late in the game. He got 72 yards, just didn't get in the end zone. Don't worry about Puka. Puka's still going to be getting the ball. What you need to worry about is that he's got one more game before Cooper comes back, probably maybe 2 more games until Cooper comes back. Elijah Moore.
Isn't it insane that 3 games into this season, Puka has a game like that, and we're talking about him being one of the biggest letdowns this week?
No, I'm not saying that at all. I'm not saying that at all.
Unbelievable.
I would have liked to get more
based on his expectations entering this week, those kind of numbers are not what everybody was thinking when literally everybody not just picked him up. He was in every lineup this week. Puka was not on people's benches this week. 25 receptions through 2 games will do that. And he was still pretty good this week, especially considering he was basically nothing before the season started. But it's crazy how quickly expectations and circumstances can change.
Well, look, and you were playing Cincinnati's defense. Cincinnati's defense is not bad. They're a good defense.
Yeah, they're an underrated defense. Big time.
Top half for sure. They're a team I look out for. I'm like, do I want to play my guy against Cincinnati? So I expected him to get in the end zone. Yardage catch wise, it gave me what I wanted. I would have liked to see him get in the end zone. But Elijah Moore goes 9 for 9, still getting it done, kind of the Adam Thielen out there in Cleveland. I'm still loving Elijah Moore. If he gets in the end zone, he's super awesome. But 9 for 9, he only had 49 yards. That was the problem. It was he couldn't get anywhere after he caught the ball. But 9 targets, 9 receptions, That's going to translate. I'm telling you right now, don't give up on Elijah Moore just yet. And of course, George Pickens in there as well, 6 of 4 for 75, but he gets some big grabs. Again, he just needs to get in the end zone, and he will. He'll get his time. Don't worry about it. As Pittsburgh comes around, I don't know. Wide receivers, another big day. Adams at number 2. I thought that was pretty significant, especially against this Pittsburgh defense. Of course, targeted on that last play, and Pittsburgh knew where it was going and picked that ball off to win the game. But for Pittsburgh to give up 172, it is something to notice. Not that Pittsburgh is just this shutdown pass defense. It's just that line, that rush is really what's getting in there and getting it done for them.
Yeah, I mean, it looks like Jimmy Garoppolo decided before the game started, I'm just going to throw to Devontae today. He's my best wide receiver, and I don't want to be harassed by TJ Watt in that pass rush all game long. So I'm going to take the snap, and I'm just going to throw it towards Devontae and see what happens. And it worked out fantasy-wise, at least.
It did. I hope everything worked out for you guys fantasy-wise. We've hit our time for today. Didn't really get into the games coming up this week, but, you can go through and let us know who you think is going to win. Let us know where the fantasy plays are this week. We did work that in who to play this week a bit. We talked about last week, which is really, for me, kind of the point. I want to hear about people's fantasy weeks. I like to talk about people's fantasy weeks, including ours. So I think mission accomplished. And throughout the week, check us out. Check Adam Holz out at sportskita.com, NFL writer over there at sportskita.com. You can go to at Adam Holz Sports on Twitter X, I like to call it now, and link to all his stuff. He puts out great stuff, great knowledge on the NFL season. You can check out mine at That EFIN Show, and all the links to all the stuff there. We do college talk, and always go over to the Fantasy Sports Corporation to get entertained and get all the fantasy advice that you want, really in every sport. But we're heavy on football right now, but we've got MMA, we've got baseball, we've got golf, we've got basketball. It's all right there over at the Fantasy Sports Corp, the Fantasy SD on Twitter. Thanks for joining this week. If you joined us, thanks for watching the recording. If you watched it, thanks for catching the shorts. If that's how you glean some information this week, we will be back next week. Join us 9:30 every Tuesday morning on That EFIN Fantasy Sports Show with me, Chris Fox, and the Adam Holz. You guys have a great fantasy week, and we'll see you next week. Hope you guys win. Take care, everybody.